Chapter 19, the participles active and passive, and the infinitives absolute and construct. When we're looking at the participles and infinitives, we're really looking at hybrid forms. The participle is really a hybrid between a verb and an adjective. And when you get to an infinitive, it's really sort of a cross between a noun and a verb. And so sometimes they're going to behave like their father, and sometimes they're going to behave like their mother. Sometimes they're going to behave like a noun, like the infinitive. It's going to behave like a noun, and other times it's going to behave like a verb. And the same with the participle. Sometimes it's going to behave like a verb, and at other times it'll behave like an adjective. And so we want to keep that in mind as we go through here and remember that. So now, first thing we want to do is look at the active participle. And again, we'll call this the cotel form. And the reason is your masculine singular absolute form is cotel. And so when someone refers to a cotel form, they're talking about an active participle. So the first thing you have to do is you look at the forms, and you can see that in section 2 of chapter 19. And again, the distinguishing characteristic of these active participles is the irreducible historic long holum that you see between R1 and R2. That is the real distinguishing characteristic that you're going to see in all the forms. Notice that in the masculine plural absolute, again, you get the endings of an adjective. Again, this is a combination of an adjective and a verb. But what's fascinating is you look at that form, the masculine plural absolute, is that the ending is clearly an adjective ending. But what do you do about that? Well, that's like a verb. What we have here is, even though we do not have a vocalic ending, any ending on a participle, we're going to regard it just as if it were a verbal ending, and therefore will reduce the thematic vowel. And so again, you can see even in form, it's somewhat like the adjective, the ending, but it's also like the verb in the way that it reduces the thematic vowel in an open pretonic position. So again, you can see a little bit of dad in him, and you can see a little bit of mom in him. That's the important thing to see, again, with the holum. And so with the feminine singular absolute, kotala, no problem there. And if you skip down and go to the feminine plural absolute, kotalot, no problem there. Again, you have the endings of the adjective. You have the reduction of the thematic vowel with what you would have with verbs. And then you have the characteristic of the participles, and that is the holum. But there is one form I do want to point out to you, and that's what we're going to call the T-form participle. And you can see that the T-form participle is very much a seglet formation. It is a seglet formation. The T here is clearly the old feminine T of the original feminine T. Notice it does not have the accent. And so when that feminine T was without the accent, it was able to be preserved. And then you see a seglet formation that has occurred here. So you probably had something like maybe the hiric for the sere, which would become sere when it's accented closed. And then you had the double schwaz, but what did you do? Well, you added the kudzu, and before long the kudzu was everywhere. Unfortunately, it can't get to that holum, you see. But that's what you have, and this is the true feminine T in the T-form participle, feminine singular. So you can get one like kotala, or you can get kotelet, like you see here. It's optional. It can go either way. When you look at the construct, again, kotel is the same for the masculine singular absolute or for construct. When you go to the masculine plural construct, kotele, again, notice the ending is, again, the ending of an adjective, but notice the reduction of the thematic vowel like a verb. The feminine singular construct, again, ends in the patach tav, like you would expect. Or you can also get the T form again. Remember, in your seglet nouns, the absolute and the construct in the masculine singular absolute is identical. And it's the same thing you get here with cotellet for the absolute and cotellet for the construct. Same thing. And then again, for your feminine plural construct, the form is also identical. So you want to keep that in mind. Look down again at my comment number 3 under section 1 here. The participles with adjectival endings, except the T form, reduce the thematic vowel like a verb with vocalic endings. And I say that with italics there. And so make sure you remember that. The next is the function or the syntax of the active participle. And first we want to talk about the adjective side of it, and then we'll talk about the verbal side of it. First, the adjective side. A participle can function just like an attributive adjective. When that happens, it follows the noun and it agrees with it in gender, number, and definiteness again. And so the example I give you here is ha'ish, haikotel. It's the man who, or the man who kills, or the one killing. But again, this is just like an attributive adjective, like we discussed back around chapter 10. And the next one down is the woman, the one killing. Ha'isha, ha'kotela. There, again, what you have is they agree in gender, number, and definiteness. Notice how both of them have the article. The next use of it, again, it can be like a substantive use. Just like you can take an adjective in Hebrew like hatov, that can just simply mean the good man. Same thing with a participle. What you can do is simply have the article with the participle, and or without even the article. You just have the participle there, and just like an adjective can function as a noun, the same thing with a participle. And so in my example, hakotel is the man who kills, even though the word man is not there. And the man who dwells, or the one who dwells. And then finally you get yoshev, dweller, a dweller, something like this. Next is the verbal use. Now we have the attributive use like an adjective, but now here comes the use as a verb. The participle is used like a verb in Hebrew. And when it happens this way, it will agree with the subject in gender and number, but again, it will not agree with it in definiteness. And again, that's like the predicative use of the adjective, if you remember again back in chapter 10. And so in the examples, you got ha'ish, kotel. It's the man is killing, or the man kills. And so again, you can see they do not agree in definiteness, and that's important. Now, concerning the aspect and the tense of the participle. The aspect of a participle is a durative or a continual action, usually. And the tense is normally present, but context will, again, must aid you in determining whether the context is past, present, or future. But naturally, the participle comes down as a present, and naturally it's durative or continual in action. So if you say the one killing, the idea is he's killing over and over again, or he's continually killing. Again, the action is seen in duration. That's the way we want to see it. In section 3, we have the passive participle, or the katul form, and obviously katul, again, comes from the masculine singular absolute form, katul. And so when we talk about, again, the katul form, we're talking about the called passive participle. For this one, the distinguishing characteristic is the thematic vowel, which is a shurik. And that shurik is never going to reduce. We've got to remember that. But this kametz, as you know, it would go back to a patach. And so if you add some type of ending, some type of adjectival ending on it, then that original patach will be in the originally open propretonic position. And so you know what happens. It's going to get reduced to a shva. And so when you look at those forms, you should be able to understand those. There should be no problem. Because again, those endings are simply adjectival endings, which you've learned long ago. And you're shifting the accent, reducing the original patach to a shva, and really there's nothing really to show you there. Now, when we get to the function again, or the syntax, it's very much like the active. Matter of fact, it's identical. And so again, it can have an adjectival use, or again, like an attributive adjective. And so there it will agree with its noun in gender, number, and definiteness. It can have a substantive use. Again, like an adjective, you can simply say the good, meaning the good man. And so again, it can be functioning as a subject. And then again, it has a verbal use. And when it's a verbal use, it'll agree in gender and number, but not in definiteness. And so you can see my example, they are killed or they are being killed. And again, the aspect and tense of the passive participle is exactly the same as the active. So go back and review that if you have any questions. Now we go to the infinitive absolute and construct. And those terms, absolute and construct, as applied to the word infinitive, is pretty accurate. And so you want to check out that footnote that I've attached to it. The terms absolute and construct as describing infinitives and nouns are analogous. The absolute noun stands absolutely or by itself. And the infinitive absolute does too. It stands by itself. You're not going to get some type of pronominal suffix on it. You're not going to get a preposition attached to it. And so it stands absolutely or independently. The construct, on the other hand, the infinitive construct, things are constructed onto it, like pronominal suffixes. Also, you can have prepositions on the front of it and things like this. And so with the infinitive in the construct state, you can put things like prepositions and pronominal suffixes. You can construct those right on. But in the absolute, infinitive absolute, you will put no pronominal suffixes, no prepositions on the front of it. And so you want to keep that in mind. The form is only two forms, and that's really nice. You only have to memorize two forms here. You have katol, and of course, as soon as you see that, and sometimes it can be written defectively, but usually you'll get the full whole and vav. This form here looks just like the imperative, call imperative to MS. Again, context will have to guide you in which way to go. But this is the, well, let me do the infinitive absolute first. The infinitive absolute, of course, would have the long kamets here. And that form is not identical to the imperative. And here you want to translate, probably the best way would be like a gerund, just killing. And then I talk about the syntax of it. And the infinitive absolutes frequently occur before the finite verb. And the finite verb will be of the same root usually. So you say katol, katal, or something like this. And what it does is it emphasizes some aspect of the verb. You can simply say he killed, just say katal. But if you want to say katol, katal, then you're lending much more emphasis onto the verb, or some type of aspect of the verb is being emphasized. And so probably the best way to translate it is by using a word like really, surely, indeed. So he has indeed killed. He has certainly. It gives the statement a stronger assertion quite frequently. And so that's what I'm communicating to you here. But also the infinitive absolute can sometimes give the notion of intensity of action. And I give you an example with shamor. Shamor, shamar. Keeping, literally what it says is keeping he has kept. And the idea is he has kept very carefully. He has kept completely. So there's an intensification of the verb and sometimes that we must watch out for. Now we come to the infinitive construct. And by the way, you can see how this form even looks like an infinitive absolute with that long kamets. It looks like an absolute form. In the construct, to have the schwa here, again, the form has an appearance of being in construct with another word. So even in its form, it has that look of a construct form. The infinitive construct, this is the form. Again, you can put a pronominal suffix on the back. You can put a preposition here. But we'll learn about the putting the prepositions on the back of it at another time. But this is used very frequently in Hebrew. As a matter of fact, the infinitive construct is more common than the infinitive absolute in Hebrew. And usually the best way to translate it is either with an infinitive, like an English infinitive, so to kill, or again like an English gerund, killing. Oftentimes you will see a lamed preposition on the front of an infinitive construct. And of course, what you would get is a schwafite, and that's why you would get the hirik there. And this is the way you would express purpose. or maybe result, but mostly we would say purpose. So in order to kill would be the idea with the lamed preposition, or for the purpose of killing. And so usually when you get that lamed on an infinitive construct, you will not get one on infinitive absolute. It expresses the notion of purpose and occasionally a result, but purpose is what you really want to go with. So that's the participle and that's the infinitive. Now you need to read through the chapter and do the drills and obviously do the vocabulary.